Hi, welcome to the Metabot RPA Integration using Automation Anywhere course. I am Ankan and I will be leading you through this course. I began my career as a software engineer with interest in technology, passionate about coding, solving challenges, and soon I moved into RPA as it was the answer to some of my challenges. So there are some prerequisites for this to happen. Number one, you need the Automation Anywhere client that is also available for free, and the download link is in below. And you would also need a Visual Studio. You can either download it for free or you can have a paid versions also, and the link is mentioned below. So the reason why we need Visual Studio is just for the DLL creation purpose, since this demo will include a small C# coding, and hence the Visual Studio is used. And some minimum knowledge of the Automation Anywhere's RPA platform is also needed, since we won't be going much deep into what are the features and how we can use that in Automation Anywhere's platform itself. So these are the sets of dummy REST API links that we are going to use to fetch some of the employee data from the source. So let's start with the DLL creation, for which we have to write some C# codes in the Visual Studio platform. And I have opened Visual Studio right now in my machine. So we will go to File, New, and then create a project. So for creating a DLL, we should be using a .NET standard, which is a .NET standard class library, since these are the DLLs and these are executable files. So let's name our DLL as employee data. Okay, so it's creating a new project called employee data. Okay, so it's done. So we get a blank class with the namespace as employee data and a public class name as sample1. So I'll change it to employee class for our easy reference. Okay, so this is a DLL, and now I'm going to write the easiest way, or there are many ways of how you can connect or integrate with any APIs, but since we are not focusing towards coding in this course, I'll be using one of the easiest way to connect to an API and then fetch the response out of that. So for this, I'll create a new method first. I'll name it as public string. I'll name it as employee data. Okay, so there are many ways to connect to API. So I'll be using a functionality called HTTP client, which we can inherit from the .NET function called namespace called system.net, and another called system.net.http. using for HTTP client. So we are writing the codes to connect to an API, and now I'll declare a variable called response to connect to the URL. So it's called the HTTP client. So we are inheriting the properties, so we don't have to end up writing all the codes in details, since our focus is not on the code. Okay, and we want to publish the result, and that's it. So these are the lines of code we have written. So it's we have a class, and inside the class we have a method, and inside the method we are using the HTTP client functionality to connect to one of the URLs which we'll be putting. So to take the URL, we have to declare this URL as a parameter so that we can take these URL as an input from any tester classes or any, or later we will see how we can take an input from a Metabot as well. So I'll be discussing on that later. So once we have done that, we have to put the URL over here. Now, since we don't have the URL now, we'll put the URL variable over here that we take as a parameter. So we are done with the coding, and now the last part we have to return the response. So it's like return response. Yeah. So we are done with the DLL code, and now as we know that we cannot run a DLL directly, so we need to create a tester class for this. And the way to create a tester class is to have a individual class in which we will create, and we will name it as a tester class for this. So we can add on the solution, and then we can go to the .NET Core to create a console app, and we will name this as employee tester. Now we have got a tester class in the same namespace, and now all we have to do is inherit this class property into this. So to do that easily, we can right click on the tester class, and then we will go to the add, and then we can add as a reference. So once we have that reference, we will get the class name that we have created earlier, and all we have to do is check this and then inherit the properties. Okay, so now this is a tester class, and this is the main class. Now all we have to do is call the another class that we have created, and then to call the method and to pass the parameter to see what is the response from the API. So to do that, initially we have to create an instance of the class, and I'll do employee class, which is the name of our old class, and I'm creating an instance of the same class as em is equals to new employee class. Oops. Okay, so I have to inherit the namespace also in here for data. Yep. So once we did this, employee, and now we have to inherit the method which resides inside this class. So we can see the method name is employee data, and once we put a dot over here, we can see the method reflecting over here. So this is another way to verify if our coding is going in the right direction or not. So as we can see, it's still throwing an error, and it's asking for the URL to be passed, and we need to pass the URL over here so that we can pass the parameter inside the class, inside the old class directly. So let us go to our old file so that I can copy the endpoint over here. So this is the URL, and I'm going to paste it over here. Okay, so our last part would be to capture this in the output screen. So I'm going to pass this whole thing inside the print statement in .NET, which is the console.writeLine, and then we have to read this. So I'll write read line. Okay, that's it. Now I'm done with the coding, so let's compile this to see if there are any errors. Okay, so the build is successful. Now before we run this, we need to keep in mind that since this is a tester class and another one is the DLL, so the DLL cannot be run directly. So we need to add, set this tester class as the startup project. Otherwise, your Visual Studio will go on and try running the old DLL, and that will throw an error. So we need to do the small step before running this. So I'm running this and let's see what happens here. Okay, so we can see that the API has returned the JSON response from the as a response of the API, and we can see all of the parameters, all of the JSON properties extracted from that. So it has a lot of JSON objects which has the parameters of ID, employee name, employee salary, and everything. Now, as you guys remember that in the PPT, I have shared two endpoint links of for fetching all employees data and fetching a single employee data. So I'll be taking up this single employee data and let's see how the API response happens. So I'll take any of the IDs from here and the endpoint from the PPT. So I'll take this first ID from here and I'll stop the current execution. Yep, we are good to go. So let's build this. Okay, it's successful, and then let's run this. Okay, so we can see the response from the API with a single ID and the single responses with respect to the employee's ID, where it includes the name, salary, and age, and the profile image of this particular ID. So we are done with the coding part, the C# coding part. Now our next job would be to integrate this with Automation Anywhere Metabot and see how it works over there. So let's go to the Automation Anywhere client to see how that happens. Okay, so our last part in the coding activity would be to take out or to find the DLL file which we have created so that we can use it easily as a reference in our Metabot creation. So all we have to do in order to find the DLL over here is that the class which we have created, we can just right click on it directly and we can select this option called Open Folder in File Explorer. Once we do that, we have to go inside the bin folder and then the debug folder and then the .NET Standard 2.0. And in here we can see our DLL file which we have created. So we have to use this file in our Metabot creation that we are going to do right now. Okay, so now we have to create a Metabot using Automation Anywhere's enterprise client. And I have opened the client in my machine and I have went to the section called Metabots, where I will be creating a new Metabot from scratch, showing how our DLL works in here. So I'll name the Metabot as employee Metabot. And we have to select the all application radio button since our code is not specific to any applications. So once we create the Metabot, we will get this screen exactly, and we will have two tabs over here, one called the assets, another the logic. So in the asset, we need to add our DLL which we have created. So I have saved it to a particular location and I'll use the same from here. And once we have the DLL, we have to create the logics which connects the inputs and passes as a parameter to the DLL. So if we go to the logic tab, we will find the option called add logic. So I'll be doing it right now. So once we open the logic, in the right hand side we will see our class that we have created inside the C# coding, and we will get to see our method that which we have created in our C# and used the URL as a parameter. So once we click on it, we can see a window of the input parameter and then the return the response in which we want to save it in a variable. So I'm going to first of all we need to create a variable in here, and we will name this as URL, and I'm going to put one of the IDs in here for reference. So this is the URL endpoint for which the API will take the response from, and I'm going to use the same URL in here. and I'm going to save the output temporarily to the clipboard. So clipboard is just a system variable which we can use for a temporary purpose. So once we click on the add button, we will see one of the logics created over here, and which says execute the employee data method of the employee data DLL API, and then assign its output the clipboard. So if the line number 1 runs, it will assign the output the clipboard. And now as a second step, we need to display the output over here. So for that, we are printing the clipboard to see what is the response. So we have to name the logic as well. So I'll write as logic 1, or like logic all employee data. Cool. Now let's run our logic directly from here to see how the Metabot returns the response from the API. Okay, so now we can see the response of the API directly coming to the Automation Anywhere client's message box, and this is the same exact response which we have received while we were doing the coding in the Visual Studio. So this is a quick example of how we can create a Metabot using a C# code. And okay, so now I will be creating same logic, but I'll keep it limited to a single employee. So let's do this. I don't need to create the variable again. I'll just copy it from the previous so that I don't end up in writing the same thing. And in this, I'll say I want a particular employee's data instead of having all. So we will take it from our code, which we did just now. And we will be expecting to receive a single employee's response. So we will use in the same way, and then the same. Okay, so let's see, let's name this as logic single employee data. Let's run this. Okay, now we can see the response of the code. Okay, now lastly we will see quickly how to create a Taskbot and to call the Metabot from the Taskbot itself. So for that I have went to the task section, and then I'll select the new, and then I'll select a workbench to start the coding from scratch. So in here we will use our Metabot that we created just now, and for that in the left hand side we have the employee Metabot created, so we will just drag and drop. Okay, so we cannot see any of the variables to be passed over here. So if we go back to our Metabot, we will see the variables, and I have not really set the parameter type of it. So to take an input from the task, we have to set the parameter type of this variable as input, so that we can pass the values from a task file itself. So I'll do it for both the logics that we have created just now. Yep, it's done. And now let's go back to our task, and let's see. Yep. So here, instead of passing the values from Metabot, we can pass the values directly from here. So yes, I'm going to paste the same URL over here. All employees data. So again, we can use a variable over here. So we have to add a variable over here, and then we have to call the variable's value over here. So let us do that. That's one of the best practices we follow, and let us follow that. Yeah. So I'll create for URL for all employees, and URL for single employee. So we'll take from the code. Yeah. Now let's pass the all employee variable over here, and let's pass the single employee variable over here, and let us recon. Okay, so we need to save this task. Now I'll call this task as employee mbot task. Employee mbot task. So just to make sure we are not hard coding anything over here, I'll remove these values from here so that we take the values from, we can test whether the values are getting passed from the Taskbot itself or not. So these are the two logics, and then we have created a Taskbot inside which we are calling the Metabots from here. So the layer goes the first we have a Taskbot that talks with the Metabot, and then the Metabot talks with the DLL. So we can have so this is just an easy example of how you can create a C# code and integrate with your automation anywhere, but there are plenty of complicated use cases in which you require coding on the C# platform, and then you have to integrate with your automation anywhere to achieve the major challenges out there in the market. So this is it, and then we will run the logic to see how it works. Yeah. Yes, so let's run this to see how it works. So in the logic file, I have just displayed the printing messages over here. So that is the reason why I'm not displaying the printing messages over here. So we can have that either ways. So instead of having this printed over here, we can declare another variable and then declare the variable type, parameter type as output, and then we can show the responses over here. So that would be the best practice, but since this is just a demo, so I'll be showing in this way. So we can see the first response of the API, which has the employees data, and then the second response of the API would be a single employee data, which has this parameter as the input from the taskbot itself. So this is all about creating your REST API integration with automation anywhere using C#. And since this is a simple integration, we don't have much use cases to uh, uh, follow in here. So I'll be showing you another example of how you can do this directly using the Automation Anywhere's platform itself. There's a command called REST Web Services in which we can have the same kind of response without doing a lot to code. But yes, as I said, for majority of the complex use cases where there are lots of debug, or where there are lots of use cases, we cannot have this use these REST web services, and then we end up in coding a C# instead of using these REST web services. So I'll be showing you how we can do this directly, and for this I'll be using the single employees endpoint. So we'll use this. The method is get, and once we post this URI over here, the values of the request parameters that are the default ones are taken by is generated by the tool itself. So we can say this is a good thing, and then if we send the request, it gives us the response of the HTTP code, which is 200. That means it's connecting to the API, and the API is giving a response for the request that we have requested for. So we can save the response directly to one of the variables called clipboard, and then the same way we can display the message over here. So I'll disable the initial lines of codes, and then we can see how this code behaves. Yep, we can see the same thing which we did with the help of a C# code can be done with a single command in here using the Automation Anywhere's platform. But yes, as I told, there are much more complex use cases where there are customizations needed for which we have to rely on C#. So that was the query from multiple people's in around 8 people websites or Quora or Stack Overflow. That is why I ended up creating this video, so that it helps you guys to integrate more and more of your codes into the using the Automation Anywhere's platform, and then help you to achieve more and more complex use cases in your daily life or in your for your official purposes. So I'll go back to my presentation, and yep, so some of the helping sites you can get from here. So we have a documentation portal, and you can go to docs.automationanywhere.com if you need any document related helps, and also you can visit the community forum of Automation Anywhere, where you can post your queries, and there will be lots of people to help who have the Automation Anywhere as a tool in their computers. So yep, thank you for watching, and for any comments, feedbacks, or any kind of suggestions, you can always let me know in the comment section, and I will be happy to help you.